February 1943. A German Panzer commander stood examining a captured American weapon in Tunisia, turning the simple steel tube over in his gloved hands. He laughed, tossing it dismissively to his subordinate. "This is what the Americans send against our tigers? A plumber's pipe with batteries?" His fellow officers joined the mockery, photographing themselves holding the crude device like a toy. Within 18 months, that commander would be dead, his Tiger tank reduced to burning wreckage by that same weapon he'd ridiculed. The joke, as it turned out, was on the Wehrmacht. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The weapon they mocked would claim over 2,000 German armored vehicles, transform the entire doctrine of mechanized warfare, and prove that sometimes the crudest answer to a complex problem is the deadliest. This is the story of how a device assembled from scrap metal and wire became the nightmare of the German armored forces, how American industrial simplicity crushed German engineering superiority, and how soldiers with $50 worth of equipment learned to hunt $100,000 killing machines. The genesis of this revolution began not in a sophisticated weapons laboratory, but in the dusty workshops of Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland, on a sweltering afternoon in May 1942. Captain Edward Uhl, a young ordnance officer barely 30 years old, had become obsessed with a seemingly impossible problem. American infantry faced German Panzer divisions armed with nothing more effective than antitank rifles that bounced harmlessly off armor plate and grenades that required suicidal proximity to deploy. The standard American antitank gun, the 37mm, had earned the bitter nickname doorknocker because that's all it did against German medium tanks: knock on the door and announce your presence before getting obliterated. Uhl had spent weeks studying a rocket design developed by another officer, but the delivery system remained elusive. How do you give an infantryman the ability to fire a shaped-charge rocket without requiring a massive launch platform? The British had their PIAT, a spring-loaded spigot mortar that required the strength of a weightlifter to cock and the patience of a saint to aim accurately. The Soviets had anti-tank rifles so heavy that crews sometimes abandoned them during retreats. Neither solution satisfied the fundamental requirement: give any soldier, regardless of physical strength or technical training, the power to kill a tank. On the morning of May 14, 1942, Uhl walked through the Proving Ground scrapyard, not searching for anything in particular, simply thinking. Among the discarded materials, he spotted a length of seamless steel tubing, approximately 2 inches in diameter, used for some forgotten artillery project. He picked it up, felt its weight, and experienced what he later described as a moment of perfect clarity. The rocket didn't need a complex launcher. It needed a tube. Just a tube. The rocket's own exhaust could propel it forward while the tube simply provided direction and electrical ignition. Within hours, Uhl had requisitioned the tube, attached a crude electrical firing mechanism scavenged from other equipment, and fashioned rudimentary sights from bent metal wire. He loaded one of the experimental M6 rockets, a shaped-charge warhead mounted on a rocket motor, into the rear of the tube. The theory was simple but untested. When fired, the rocket's exhaust would vent safely out the back while the warhead traveled forward through the tube and toward the target. If the exhaust came out wrong, it could kill the operator. If the rocket tumbled, it would be useless. If the electrical connection failed, nothing would happen at all. Uhl convinced a colleague, Lieutenant Charles Leroy, to observe the first test firing. They set up a wooden target at 50 yards behind the workshop, far from prying eyes and official scrutiny. Uhl shouldered the tube, aimed using his improvised wire sights, and hesitated. Every calculation suggested this would work. But calculations and reality diverged frequently in weapons development. He squeezed the electrical trigger. The rocket whooshed from the tube with a sound unlike any weapon either man had heard before, a rushing hiss followed by the sharp crack of the warhead detonating against the wooden target. The backblast vented harmlessly behind Uhl, dissipating in a cloud of exhaust. The target, meanwhile, sported a hole punched cleanly through its center. Leroy stared in silence for a moment, then simply said, "Fire another one." Uhl reloaded in under 10 seconds, a process requiring nothing more than sliding a new rocket into the tube and reconnecting the electrical wire. The second shot struck within inches of the first. They had fired 2 rockets with perfect accuracy using a weapon assembled from scrap that morning. The implications were staggering. Word of the successful test reached Colonel Leslie Skinner, the officer overseeing rocket development at Aberdeen. Skinner immediately recognized the potential but also the political minefield. The Army Ordnance Department had invested heavily in conventional anti-tank guns and British-designed weapons. Proposing that a crude tube could replace sophisticated artillery would encounter resistance from officers who'd built careers around traditional systems. Skinner needed to demonstrate the weapon's effectiveness in a context that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. He arranged for a demonstration before senior ordnance officials, scheduling it to coincide with planned tests of the British-supplied spigot mortars. The date was set for June 2, 1942. Multiple generals would attend, including representatives from the Infantry Board who would ultimately decide which weapons American soldiers carried into combat. The stakes were absolute. One successful demonstration could revolutionize anti-tank warfare. Failure would consign the rocket launcher to the dustbin of rejected prototypes. Uhl spent the intervening weeks refining the design, though refining overstates the complexity involved. He added a shoulder stock from a discarded rifle to improve stability, wrapped the forward grip area with wood to prevent burns from rocket exhaust, and created slightly more sophisticated sights, though they remained essentially bent metal. The entire weapon could be fabricated in any machine shop with basic welding equipment. No special alloys, no precision machining, no complex assembly. This simplicity was either the weapon's greatest strength or its fatal weakness, depending on whether traditional military thinking could accept that simplicity might triumph over sophistication. The day of the demonstration arrived with unfortunate weather, overcast and threatening rain. On the firing range, officials had assembled an impressive array of anti-tank weapons for comparative testing. The British spigot mortars sat on their tripods, complex mechanisms of springs and firing pins requiring careful setup. Several anti-tank rifles leaned against ammunition crates, long-barreled weapons that could punch through light armor but required prone shooting positions and produced punishing recoil. And then there was Uhl's launcher, looking utterly inadequate beside the heavy equipment surrounding it. The target was a captured German Panzer III, authentic armor that would provide realistic test conditions. The range was set at 150 yards, a distance considered close for anti-tank engagement but far enough to test accuracy. General Gladion Barnes, Chief of Research and Development for Army Ordnance, examined each weapon with professional interest. When he reached Uhl's launcher, he paused, picking it up with evident skepticism. "This is your rocket launcher, Captain?" Barnes asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes, sir." "The M1 rocket launcher," Uhl replied, using a designation he'd assigned without official approval. Barnes hefted the tube, noting its light weight. "And this defeats armor how, exactly?" Uhl explained the shape charge principle, how the rocket's warhead focused explosive force into a jet capable of penetrating steel plate. Barnes listened politely, but his expression suggested he'd heard many promising theories that failed in practice. He set the launcher down and moved on to examine the other weapons. The testing began with the anti-tank rifles. Shooters fired repeatedly at the Panzer III from prone positions, the massive rifles bucking against their shoulders. The armor-piercing rounds sparked off the tank's glassy plate, leaving scratches but no penetrations. Against the Panzer III's frontal armor, the rifles were effectively useless. The gunners stood, rubbing bruised shoulders, their expressions discouraged. Next came the British spigot mortars. Crews assembled the weapons with practiced efficiency, though the process took several minutes per mortar. The first team aimed carefully and fired. The bomb arced toward the tank and impacted the ground 10 feet short, detonating harmlessly. The second crew adjusted and fired. Their bomb sailed over the tank entirely. The third crew achieved a hit on the tank's turret, but the shaped charge failed to detonate properly, merely denting the armor. The fourth and fifth attempts resulted in one near miss and one mechanical failure where the mortar's spring mechanism jammed. General Barnes consulted with his staff, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. American infantry needed effective anti-tank weapons immediately. The situation in North Africa was deteriorating, and German armor was proving devastatingly effective. These tests suggested that American troops would go into battle effectively helpless against panzer formations. Uhl stepped forward. "Permission to demonstrate the rocket launcher, sir?" Barnes gestured toward the Panzer III. "Proceed, Captain." "Though I confess my expectations are modest." Uhl lifted the launcher to his shoulder. The weapon weighed just 13 pounds, light enough to carry all day without fatigue. He sighted through the simple wire frame, aligning it with the tank's center mass. The electrical firing mechanism was simplicity itself, a trigger that completed a circuit, sending current from 2 standard flashlight batteries to the rocket's igniter. He squeezed the trigger. The rocket leaped from the tube with that distinctive whoosh, exhaust venting safely behind Uhl in a cloud of gray smoke. The shape-charged warhead struck the Panzer III's side armor and detonated with a sharp crack. When the smoke cleared, a hole approximately 3 inches in diameter had been punched through the armor plate, the metal peeled back around the penetration like a flower opening. The assembled officers stared in stunned silence. Uhl calmly reloaded, a process taking less than 10 seconds, and fired again. The second rocket struck within a foot of the first, creating another clean penetration. He reloaded and fired a third time, hitting the turret and likely killing anyone who would have been inside. Barnes walked to the tank, running his fingers around the penetration holes. The shaped charge had done exactly what Uhl promised, focusing explosive force into an armor-defeating jet. Barnes turned back to Uhl, his expression transformed from skepticism to intense interest. "Captain, how quickly can you produce these weapons?" "Sir, any factory with basic welding capability can manufacture the tubes. The rockets are simple sheet metal and chemical explosive. We could begin production immediately with minimal retooling." Barnes looked at the simple tube, then at the destroyed tank, then back at Uhl. "I want 5,000 units for the North Africa operation. Can you deliver?" Uhl felt his heart racing. 5,000 units meant this wasn't a trial program or limited deployment. The army was betting on his weapon. "Yes, sir. We can deliver." "Then make it happen, Captain. Because if this works in combat like it works here, you've just changed warfare." Within days, contracts were issued to General Electric and several smaller manufacturers. The specifications were so simple that production engineers expressed disbelief. A seamless steel tube of specific diameter and length. Basic welding to attach the grip and stock. Simple electrical components totaling less than $5. The entire weapon could be manufactured for approximately $22, including packaging and shipping. By comparison, a single 37mm anti-tank gun cost over $4,000 and required a trained crew and a vehicle to move it. The rocket production proved equally straightforward. Sheet metal formed into a tube for the rocket body, solid propellant cast into the motor section, and the shaped charge warhead pressed into a cone configuration. Each rocket cost less than $8 to produce. The economics were revolutionary. For the cost of one anti-tank gun, the Army could purchase nearly 200 rocket launchers and over 500 rockets. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By August 1942, the first production models rolled off assembly lines. Workers at General Electric's facility in Bridgeport, Connecticut, could complete one launcher every 2.5 hours. Production accelerated as workers gained experience, eventually reaching one launcher per hour in 40 minutes. The rockets proved even faster to manufacture, with some facilities producing over 1,000 rounds daily. But manufacturing the weapons was only half the challenge. Training soldiers to use them effectively would determine whether Uhl's invention succeeded or failed in actual combat. The infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia, received the first production models in September 1942 with orders to develop training protocols and tactical doctrine. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Freeman, assigned to oversee the training program, approached the task with professional skepticism. He'd seen many weapons that performed well on proving grounds but failed under combat conditions. The rocket launcher, which soldiers had already nicknamed the bazooka after a comical musical instrument, seemed almost too simple to be effective. Freeman assembled a test platoon of infantry volunteers and began experimentation. The first challenge was determining effective range. On the proving ground, Uhl had demonstrated accuracy to 150 yards. But could average soldiers, under stress, hit moving targets at that range? Initial tests suggested not. Beyond 100 yards, hit probability dropped precipitously unless the shooter had extensive practice. Freeman adjusted the training focus to emphasize close-range engagement, ideally under 75 yards. At that distance, even marginally trained soldiers achieved hit rates above 70%. The weapon's true strength emerged not as a long-range anti-tank gun replacement, but as an ambush weapon. Teams could conceal themselves, wait for armor to approach, and engage from positions where traditional anti-tank guns couldn't deploy. The two-man team concept evolved naturally from these tests. One soldier carried the launcher and fired, while a second carried rockets and served as loader and security. The loader could scan for threats while the gunner focused on aiming, and the team could maintain a higher rate of fire through practiced coordination. Freeman's team eventually achieved sustained fire rates of one rocket every 8 seconds with well-trained crews. Tactical scenarios revealed the weapon's versatility. In urban environments, teams could fire from upper-story windows down onto tank engine decks, attacking vulnerable top armor. In forested terrain, teams could set up hasty ambushes along roads where German armor would be channelized. In open country, teams could use terrain features for concealment, engaging from flanking positions where side armor was weaker. But the testing also revealed concerning limitations. The rocket's accuracy degraded significantly in crosswinds. Rain could short out the electrical firing system if connections weren't kept dry. Cold weather affected the rocket motor's burn rate, changing trajectory. And most troubling, the shaped charge warhead sometimes failed to detonate on impact with angled armor, the rocket glancing off rather than penetrating. Freeman compiled these findings into a comprehensive training manual, emphasizing both capabilities and limitations. His conclusion, delivered to the infantry board in October 1942, was cautiously optimistic. The bazooka represented a significant advancement in infantry anti-tank capability, but it wasn't a miracle weapon. Proper employment required training, tactical awareness, and realistic expectations about what the weapon could and couldn't accomplish. Meanwhile, preparations intensified for Operation Torch, the planned Allied invasion of North Africa scheduled for November 1942. The operation would mark the American Army's first major combat deployment in the European theater, and planners wanted every possible advantage. The bazooka, despite its rushed development and limited testing, was designated for inclusion in the invasion force. Production accelerated frantically. By November 1, manufacturers had completed approximately 3,000 launchers and 20,000 rockets. These were crated, marked as classified equipment, and shipped to staging areas in England where invasion forces were assembling. Security protocols forbade opening the crates or providing training materials. The weapons would remain secret until the operation commenced. This decision, made to preserve operational security, would nearly doom the bazooka's combat debut. Thousands of American soldiers would soon wade ashore in North Africa carrying weapons they'd never seen, let alone fired, facing combat against experienced German armored forces. The gap between proving ground success and battlefield reality was about to be tested under the harshest possible conditions. The invasion fleet approached the North African coast under cover of darkness on November 8, 1942. Aboard transport ships, American soldiers prepared for their first taste of combat, checking equipment and trying to control their nerves. Among their gear were sealed wooden crates marked with red stenciling, classified material, do not open until authorized. Inside those crates were the bazookas, still unknown to the men who would soon depend on them. Sergeant William Hawkins of the 1st Infantry Division remembered the confusion vividly in his post-war memoir. His company had landed at Oran, wading through surf with equipment held overhead, expecting immediate resistance. Instead, they found Vichy French forces willing to negotiate. During a lull in sporadic fighting, an officer appeared with one of the mysterious crates and a crowbar. "Anyone here know what this is?" the lieutenant asked, prying open the crate to reveal the bazookas nestled in protective packing. Silence greeted his question. The soldiers examined the tubes with bewilderment. Some thought they were mortars. Others guessed they were flamethrower components. Nobody knew. The lieutenant fumbled with a thin instruction sheet, reading aloud by flashlight. The M1 rocket launcher fires the M6 antitank rocket to a maximum effective range of 300 yards. Operator inserts rocket in rear of tube, connects electrical wire to contact points, aims, and depresses trigger. Hawkins volunteered to try firing one, more from curiosity than confidence. He loaded the rocket backward on his first attempt, the warhead facing the wrong direction. An observant private pointed out the mistake. On his second attempt, Hawkins got the rocket position correctly but forgot to connect the electrical wire. When he squeezed the trigger, nothing happened. On his third attempt, everything seemed right. He shouldered the tube, aimed at a distant hillside, and fired. The rocket ignited but immediately tumbled end over end, corkscrewing wildly before impacting harmlessly 200 yards away in completely the wrong direction. Hawkins later learned that moisture had infiltrated the rocket during the sea voyage, degrading the propellant and causing uneven burning. Of the first 20 rockets his unit attempted to fire over the next 2 days, only 6 flew straight and only 3 detonated properly. This catastrophic debut played out across multiple landing sites. The 509th Parachute Infantry Regiment, dropping inland to secure key positions, found their bazookas even more problematic. Rough parachute landings had damaged the electrical components on several launchers, rendering them useless. The paratroopers, facing Vichy French armor with limited anti-tank capability, improvised desperately. Some tried using the bazookas as clubs. Others discovered that if they removed the electrical firing mechanism and touched a direct battery connection to the rocket's igniter, they could sometimes get it to fire, though this method was extraordinarily dangerous. Despite these failures, a few units achieved success through persistence and luck. Near Tafaraoui Airfield, a bazooka team from the 1st Armored Division encountered 2 French Renault R-35 tanks blocking a vital road junction. Corporal James Mitchell, who'd actually read the instruction sheet carefully, positioned his team in a roadside drainage ditch. He knew the Renault's armor was thin, making it vulnerable even to a marginal hit. Mitchell waited until the lead tank approached within 40 yards, close enough that even a poorly performing rocket might connect. He fired. The rocket flew straight and struck the tank's turret ring, the thin armor there offering minimal resistance. The shaped charge detonated, and the tank immediately burst into flames. The crew bailed out, hands raised. The second tank reversed frantically and retreated. Mitchell's team had achieved the bazooka's first confirmed kill in combat, validating Uhl's design under actual battlefield conditions. News of this success spread quickly through American units, encouraging experimentation with the unfamiliar weapons. Soldiers began developing field techniques to overcome the moisture and electrical problems. They waterproofed the electrical connections with grease and tape. They test-fired rockets to identify duds before combat. They learned to approach targets from angles that maximized the rocket's penetration capability. But the real test of the bazooka, and the moment when German mockery would transform into respect, came when American forces encountered actual German troops. The Wehrmacht had deployed elements of the 5th Panzer Army to Tunisia, determined to hold North Africa despite Allied landings. These were veteran formations equipped with Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, commanded by officers who'd fought in France, Russia, and across the desert. They viewed American troops as untested amateurs who would break at the first serious engagement. The Battle of Kasserine Pass in February 1943 would prove both sides partially correct. German armor smashed through American defensive positions with shocking ease, demonstrating superior tactical skill and combat experience. American units broke and retreated, abandoning equipment and positions. But during the chaotic fighting, something unexpected happened. German tank crews began reporting encounters with American rocket weapons. Oberst Heinrich Fischer commanded a company of Panzer IVs during the assault. His after-action report, captured by American forces in 1945, described the first encounter with bazookas near Sidi Bouzid on February 14. His company had been advancing confidently across open ground, scattering American infantry with machine gun fire. Suddenly, a rocket streaked from a cluster of rocks 70 meters away and struck the lead tank on its side armor. Fisher watched the shaped charge penetrate, the explosion visible through the impact hole. The tank slewed to a halt, smoke pouring from the turret hatches. The crew evacuated, 2 men visibly wounded. Fisher immediately halted the advance and ordered his tanks to suppress the concealed American position with high explosive shells. But before his gunners could engage, 2 more rockets flew from different positions. One missed. The other struck Fisher's own tank on the forward glassy plate, the angled armor deflecting the warhead without penetration, but the impact was psychologically devastating. Fisher ordered a retreat to covered positions, calling for infantry support before continuing the advance. In his report, he described the American rocket weapon as crude but potentially dangerous, recommending that tank commanders exercise increased caution near concealed infantry positions. This represented a significant tactical shift. German armor had previously operated with near impunity against Allied infantry, confident that nothing short of dedicated anti-tank guns posed serious threats. Now, any cluster of rocks or fold in terrain might conceal soldiers with tank-killing capability. The German High Command took notice when captured bazookas arrived in Berlin for analysis. Engineers at the Kummersdorf weapons testing facility examined the weapons with professional interest mixed with condescension. The design was remarkably unsophisticated compared to German engineering standards. The sights were primitive. The electrical firing system was crude. The manufacturing quality was adequate but unremarkable. Yet when test fired against armor plate, the bazookas performed effectively within their design parameters. The shaped charge warhead could penetrate 80 to 90 millimeters of armor at 100 meters, sufficient to defeat most medium tanks from side or rear aspects. The weapon weighed only 6 kilograms, light enough for any soldier to carry. And most troubling from the German perspective, the bazooka could be manufactured using basic industrial facilities with minimal specialized tooling. German weapons designers recognized immediately that American infantry now possessed distributed anti-tank capability. Every American squad potentially included soldiers who could destroy tanks. This proliferation of tank-killing power to the lowest tactical levels represented a fundamental shift in armored warfare doctrine. German response came swiftly. By April 1943, design work had begun on the Panzerschreck, essentially a larger version of the American bazooka scaled up to 88 mm to provide greater armor penetration. Meanwhile, American production and training efforts intensified. The disastrous debut in North Africa had highlighted critical deficiencies, and the Army moved aggressively to address them. Improved moisture sealing protected rockets during shipping. Better quality control reduced dud rates to below 5%. And most importantly, comprehensive training programs ensured that soldiers understood the weapon before encountering combat. The invasion of Sicily in July 1943 showcased the matured bazooka system. American forces landing on Sicilian beaches included thousands of trained bazooka teams equipped with improved M101 launchers and more reliable M601 rockets. German and Italian defenders quickly discovered that American infantry could no longer be intimidated by armor. Staff Sergeant Robert Chen's experience illustrated the weapon's psychological impact. His squad from the 45th Infantry Division encountered a German Panzer IV tank in the town of Vittoria on July 11. The tank had positioned itself at an intersection, controlling movement through the town center with machine gun and cannon fire. Chen's squad was pinned in a building, unable to advance or retreat. Chen grabbed the squad's bazooka and moved to a second-story window overlooking the intersection. The tank sat below, approximately 60 yards away, its commander visible in the open turret hatch scanning for targets. Chen aimed carefully at the tank's side armor, the thinnest protection, and fired. The rocket struck perfectly, penetrating the armor and detonating inside the crew compartment. The tank didn't explode dramatically. It simply stopped, smoke trickling from hatches. Chen later learned that the crew had been killed or incapacitated instantly by the shaped charge jet and internal explosion. His squad advanced through the intersection unopposed. Chen's action broke the tactical stalemate, but more significantly, it demonstrated to every soldier in his company that they possessed the means to defeat German armor. Fear transformed into confidence. German after-action reports from Sicily reveal growing concern about American rocket weapons. Unit commanders reported that tank operations in urban environments had become prohibitively dangerous. Buildings provided countless concealed positions for bazooka teams. The Americans had learned to coordinate attacks, with one team drawing attention while another engaged from a different angle. German doctrine began emphasizing infantry armor cooperation, with foot soldiers clearing buildings before tanks advanced. The Italian campaign beginning in September 1943 provided ideal terrain for bazooka employment. Mountainous landscape in medieval towns created environments where traditional anti-tank guns couldn't deploy effectively but where light, portable bazookas excelled. American soldiers discovered that bazookas could defeat more than just tanks. Fortified bunkers, machine gun nests, and even stone buildings fell to shaped charge warheads. At the Volturno River crossing in October 1943, engineers used bazookas to blast holes through the walls of German fortified positions, creating entry points for assault teams. This improvised employment earned official recognition, with training manuals updated to include bunker-busting techniques. The weapon's versatility expanded its value beyond the original anti-tank role. Production statistics reflected the bazooka's battlefield success. By January 1944, American factories had manufactured over 200,000 launchers and nearly 4 million rockets. Monthly production reached 15,000 launchers and 300,000 rockets. This industrial output dwarfed German production of the Panzerschreck, which despite being technically superior in penetration capability, required more manufacturing time and resources. The cost comparison remained striking. Each American bazooka cost $23 to produce in 1944, accounting for improved components. Each rocket cost $8.50. A complete system with launcher and 10 rockets totaled approximately $108. German Panzerschrecks cost approximately $140 to manufacture, and their 88mm rockets cost $12 each. American numerical superiority in anti-tank weapons continued growing. Training evolved beyond basic marksmanship to include sophisticated tactics. The infantry school developed hunter-killer doctrine where bazooka teams operated semi-independently, using terrain and concealment to ambush German armor. Teams learned to target specific vulnerable points, engine decks, turret rings, vision ports, and track assemblies. While frontal armor on heavy German tanks like the Tiger and Panther remained largely proof against bazooka fire, side and rear armor could be penetrated reliably at close range. The weapon's proliferation fundamentally altered German operational planning. Commanders who'd previously launched aggressive armored assaults now proceeded cautiously, using infantry to screen tank movements and probe for hidden anti-tank positions. The rapid breakthrough in exploitation tactics that had brought victory in 1940 and 1941 no longer worked against an enemy where every squad possessed tank-killing capability. Armored warfare had slowed from lightning strikes to methodical advances. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.